Today, I am with Kristen Gustke. She's a certified yoga therapist, and her particular area of expertise is in chronic pain management. So I've been really excited to have Kristen come and talk to me more about how yoga is applied therapeutically. I know I personally have really benefited from practicing yoga. I've also benefited from being at the particular studio that Kristen practices at. I did a sound bath recently. That was something new, and I was really surprised how much emotion was inside of me that had a chance to get out. It was a really, really great experience. So I'm excited for Kristen to share this. Thank you for coming and talking to me today.
So welcome. So excited.
So, Kristen, would you start with a little background about yourself?
The best background to give, what most people ask is how I got into yoga. My story is interesting because I got into it at 13. We were a household that moved around a lot, child of divorce, and so spent a lot of time home alone. My mom had a book on yoga, and I was having trouble sleeping, and so I just started looking at her book. I know, it's a cool story.
Wow, I wouldn't have known that.
I know. And fell in love pretty quickly with it, but practiced all on my own, just kind of doing things out of the book for a long time. And finally went to my first teacher training in 2007. And I've been teaching ever since, which is funny because I said I was not interested in teaching. Here I am.
Yeah. Well, and that's a gap of some years from 13 to 2007.
That's right.
In the meantime, I know you have children.
Right? Yep. Yeah. I mean, in the meantime, I got a college degree, which actually is unique because I'm the first in my family, and got married and had 3 kids, and then it was actually, we were living overseas, and I was kind of like, what am I going to do with my time? So I started teaching. I know.
That's super cool. I didn't know that about you. Where did you live?
Yeah, we lived in the Netherlands and traveled all over Europe. It was when my first one was just a baby.
Wow, that is really cool. What an interesting background. Wow. So so you practiced yoga over in Europe as well?
That's where I first started teaching, but practicing just about everywhere. And again, you can think like I had a very strong personal practice. Didn't go to classes really. Just only started going to classes way many years. And I'm sorry about the whining here. I'm a dog sitting.
That's right.
And she's decided it's time to hang out with her people.
There you go.
She's making some noises.
So we'll have some ambient golden retriever noise in the background, but golden retrievers are sweet and happy and loving.
Incredibly sweet and loving. Yeah, that's the problem.
That's good. That's great. So, what's been your experience with grief? I know grief is a very wide brush that can be painted, and a lot of times the people that I interview have lost someone to death, but there are other kinds of grief.
Very much so. Very much so. So just speaking about my own experience of grief, as a yoga therapist, part of our training is in grief. And it was really important to learn in that training that we're always grieving something.
Yeah.
We are, grieving that, oh my gosh, my son started middle school, and I have a daughter that started high school, and I have a daughter that's a senior, so I'm grieving their childhood, quotation marks. And, we're grieving the person we used to be, and, the body we're in now, or, working with people with grief, when they have a disease, or, they have something that's affected the way they thought their life was going to go. My personal experience with that, obviously, then is, a lifetime of that. But I can say that I have 2 instances of deep grief, and it was actually from divorce. It was a divorce that was well needed, but it came with not having a relationship with his family anymore, and grieving those
Yes.
people in my life, and grieving the life we were going to
Yes.
have together, and
Yes.
grieving my children getting two parents in the same household,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
grieving things that were working well that had to shift or had to change, or even the house.
Right.
I'll go back. He still lives in that house, and I'll go visit, and I'll think
Right.
about like the life we had there. So
Right.
big grief with that, and then very interesting that I had to come to terms with that before we decided to divorce, to come to terms with grieving his mom, who I had a very close relationship with. And then
Yeah.
I processed that grief, and then I guided my kids through processing the grief of her sudden death just like 8 months later.
Wow.
Yeah, so those two big things with me, and I talked to them about how I've been grieving her for 8 9 months now, not
Right.
getting to speak to her anymore, and so here we
Right.
are, and it's different, but it's the same. So um, yoga was really a lifeline through a lot of that. Yeah.
I thank you so much for sharing that. And I appreciate hearing that even you as the teacher were able to access the power of yoga to be the student again, to gain.
Mm. We, for sure, I would say absolutely. And also, the biggest depth of yoga is you realize you're always a student.
I like
Always,
that.
always a
I
student.
have heard you say that before. I have heard you say that. Yes,
Yeah.
when I'm twisted up in something that I think, yeah, this is not pretty. Yeah. Yeah.
Never is.
Yeah, you have said, yeah, you're always a student.
Mm.
So, can you tell me about how the practice of yoga helps people with issues with chronic pain,
Mm.
with unresolved grief, difficult emotions? How does that help?
So I'm sure that you've heard a lot that there's primary grief and there's secondary grief. And the primary grief is easily enough addressed in lots of areas of your life, and you're working through that. But the secondary grief kind of gets under your skin, or
Mhm.
that conversation about going through something. You really just have to go through it. You can't stop in the middle of the dark tunnel. You have to keep going to get to the other side. But secondary grief can feel like those cold, dark walls are just closing in.
Mhm.
And so the practices of yoga help us address some of the ways that we are holding things in our body, because our body keeps the score on everything. And so grief
Yeah.
tends to bring up other grief. It tends to bring up secondary things that are also sad. Um, as I
Could you give
mentioned,
an example?
yeah, as I mentioned, it was hard. It was hard to go through a divorce, and all
Right.
of the stuff that was like right there on the surface that needed to be worked through and talked about and thought about. But it was way harder to again step forward and just see my old house and the old life that I don't have anymore, or you
Mhm.
know. Again, every time the conversation comes up that normally it would be between like two married people, and now it's between two co-parents, and that's a secondary grief. Oh, I don't get that
Right.
anymore. Um,
Right.
and so that stuff tends to kind of keep you in certain states of, when's that going to come up again? I don't know when that's going to come up again. I don't know when I'm going to feel
Right.
that again. Um, and yoga is about awareness. The most essential thing that we can get out of yoga is awareness. And yoga therapists treat most often on a pantamaya kosha model. So that just means this 5 layer model that says we need to be aware of our body and how our body is holding these things, or how our body is bringing things up. Like, you know, sadly enough, and nothing wrong with him, but sometimes a conversation with my ex could kind of tighten my shoulders and tighten my
Right.
jaw.
Right. Right.
And it,
I can relate to that kind of
yeah,
experience. Yes.
yeah, and so that's my body keeping that there and saying,
Mhm.
remember, this was sad, or you felt some things here. And then you can dive underneath that, and then there's our mind and what our thoughts are doing at that moment, and what our emotions are doing at that moment. And then there's our breath. Right? And so we're aware my breath is changing even though my body's fine. And I used to go through kind of, some PTSD, and I would be perfectly fine in my body, but, my breath was different. My heart rate was different. It was
Right.
still feeling some of that. Um,
Right.
and then we can go under a layer, and yoga wants us to look at the Vinamaya question. It wants to look at the witness, the watcher of all this, and go, how is all this affecting me? How are these pieces coming together? Um, and then, of course, there's a fifth layer, and that's the one we're trying to get to in yoga therapy, the place that says our essential nature is whole and complete. And we call it a bliss body, but it is love. And so being able to peel away all those other layers in which our body is holding its own awareness of grief means we can get down to a place where we can heal. And healing in my world never means it goes away. It means we are able to step into it and say, and I will be okay. I will feel this, it will come up, my body will react, and it will be okay. And that's the hard thing for us to process through.
But that's very, very powerful.
Mm.
And I will be okay. That's just 5 very simple words, but
It's
that's,
huge.
yeah, it is huge. Because I was thinking while you were talking about how, especially when you are experiencing profound loss, um, any kind of grief will give a sense of profound loss. It does feel like something's been stripped away from you,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, what I'm hearing you say is almost sounds like stepping into that void and being okay there.
Mm-hmm.
Am I
And that's,
hearing that right?
you are hearing it correctly, and that is the therapeutic model. That and I guess I could say the way I represent chronic pain, and we can remember that grief is just another layer of what we would call trauma, and remembering
Yes.
that trauma has this big kind of ugliness to it in our world, but it's not really. It just says what happened to you, and
Right.
did you hold on to it or did you process it? And if you didn't process it, it becomes some sort of trauma. Like I hit my toe, it hurts, and I haven't forgot about it. And every time I walk past that wall, I get mad at it. So now it's a trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so when we're representing that, I actually I don't even like stop signs. Like I think about a stop sign and I say, what it really should say is, be careful. Pay attention. It really should be a pay
Right.
attention sign.
Pay
Um,
attention. Yeah.
and so, pain in our body, whether it's emotional, mental, or physical, pain is pay attention. And it's actually a pretty faulty signal, just like a stop sign. It can't tell you if someone's coming or if something's going to happen or, if there's a dog there or not a dog there. All it can say is pay attention. And so, pain of any sort is saying, this once was something that I attached something to. It doesn't feel great. Pay attention. And so,
Yeah.
when we're aware of that and we actually allow ourselves to step into it, then we can actually go through the process of continuing to walk through the tunnel and saying, I'm paying attention and I'm safe. And if we don't feel safe, that's the problem. That's when it becomes more persistent.
Okay. I like what you're saying. Now I'm thinking this is a lot happening in the mind,
Mm-hmm.
but it's happening while you're manipulating your body, right?
You're
While
in
you're
your
moving your
body.
body.
It's in your
So
body.
so
Mm-hmm.
how does that work?
um, so yoga sees us as completely whole and complete, right? Completely whole and
Mhm.
complete, and that we don't exist in our mind or in our heart or in our body or in our breath. We exist in all of the space of us. And so therefore all of the space of us is whole and complete. But we start to get these little like wobbles or little places where our body said, no, that wasn't actually safe. Like we touch a flame, we touch the stove and go, actually, that's not so safe. Right? And so we
Right.
start to hold these messages, and they're just that, be careful. But it's also held in your body. So you couldn't say that you touch the hot stove and then your mind goes, oh, that's hot. No, your whole body goes, nope.
That's right. Yeah. You
Yeah,
feel it. Yeah.
you
And you
feel
can
it,
end up with a scar.
and you can end up with a scar, right? And so, if we want to change or process something, we have to ask our whole body to do it.
Oh, that's a very profound idea. Yes.
Mhm.
That is really interesting.
So,
Yeah.
yoga, then, as we've heard of, is a mind body practice. And it says that your mind and your body tend to separate each other because, and this is all now just neuroscience, which I totally love, that our body is kind of getting messages and going, okay, shall execute. Our mind is getting messages and it's saying, okay, shall execute, right? But that doesn't mean that they do them in tandem, right? Your mind basically is seeking, it says, okay, so Kristen is really hungry, so we should probably find something to eat. And it starts giving me messages about food and looking for food in my
Hmm.
environment and heading to the
Hmm.
fridge and staring at it and
Right,
going,
right,
yeah,
right, right.
right. But my body doesn't necessarily, it's just helping me execute that. It's not necessarily, following that same path. In fact, we can have our mind tell us we're hungry and we're not. We're
Right,
actually, right, like many people in grief in some sort, they're trying to fill something. It's not actually hunger, but our mind says, well, I must be
right,
hungry because something is empty. Yeah.
right.
Okay. So then when we combine our breath, or what we call like a prana, and we feel our life force inside of that, that's what connects the two together. And so we can check in with our breath, and we can check in with our heart rate, and we can check in with our nervous system, and we can say, well, what is my nervous system state? Because it will never lie to us. And so it melds those two together and it says, well, before I head over to the fridge, what's my breath doing? Okay, what's my heart doing? Okay, what's my body doing? Is the rest of me hungry, or is it just my mind trying to fix this?
That's really that's so interesting. It's so much deeper than what my thought process usually is when I think I need to get to a yoga class, right? I'm
Right.
thinking, oh, I'm really stiff. I get up in the morning, things aren't bending the way they should, and so I'm going to go to yoga and stretch.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm thinking in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's interesting how and I do the gentle yoga. Yeah, I don't do
Mm-hmm.
the I don't know, it almost looks like, aerobic endurance
Yeah.
yoga. I don't do that one. But it's interesting how if I do a session of the gentle yoga, it really does quiet my mind
Mm-hmm.
and I sleep better
Mm-hmm.
and I do move better. But it was surprising to me um, recently when I went and yeah, I went thinking I'm really tense, I'm really tight, so I want to stretch. But then I ended up being aware of how well I slept that night and how quiet my
Mm-hmm.
mind was.
Mm-hmm.
That was
Yes. Yeah. And that's exactly, maybe I went about it in a roundabout pattern, but exactly. And that's getting into your nervous system and your prana. And your prana starts to go, oh, I can connect these two together and I can settle.
right.
Um, if I could give a metaphor for that, because that is how yoga works, and yoga therapy is this unique field because yoga's been around for thousands of years, and it's been used for thousands of years to help people with their health and wellness. But only recently have we started saying, hey, but we're going to research this.
Uh-huh.
So there was, a long time ago, not a long time ago, a while ago, there was a study on cardiac patients and did it help with, their blood pressure and, other things going on with their heart? It did. But it wasn't necessarily the postures that helped. It was the mindfulness, it was the awareness of it. And so we did deeper research and we showed that yoga works through heart rate variability, it works through vagal tone. And so what you found is just stretching, being in your body, so being embodied and processing what's going on in your body, whatever is being held by grief or trauma or pain, processing that tells your nervous system, oh, I don't have to be on such heightened sensitivity of paying attention to those stop signs. I can chill out for a little second. And I think of it as like, and then you get on the freeway and you can just kind of cruise for a little bit. There aren't any stop signs. You're still
Yeah.
driving, you're still going, but you have this ability for your vagus nerve to regulate you better. And and there's science behind that. We now know That's how yoga works. But we think we're moving and we think we're stretching, but what we're doing is giving our body time to process.
That is so interesting.
It
That's
really is.
amazing. Yeah, that's amazing because that's exactly what happened to me. That's so crazy. Like I think like my husband is less enthusiastic about it, right?
Mhm.
But I wonder if that's partly because he's also less enthusiastic about talking about
Mm.
grief, you know,
Yeah.
or things like that. What have you noticed in clients between those who really thrive in the practice and those who maybe you see holding back or
Mm. Goodness. I would say the thing I notice probably the most is that, yes, if anything, if we approach it with we're eager and open and curious, we will process faster. Um, but a lot of the time, if we've put up a wall of resistance, and believe me, I sure did too, if we put up a wall of resistance, it's because we don't feel safe.
um,
So, finding a modality in which someone feels safe is the trickiest bit. And some people feel safe all alone in their bathtub, and people feel safe in the arms of someone they care about, and some people don't feel safe until they're on a beach in the sunshine on vacation. Some people
right,
don't ever feel safe. That's been hard for me to have clients, and they go, I actually don't know if I can give you a single instance where I remember what safety felt like. But it's really
right,
important to get our nervous systems to recognize what safe feels like, because otherwise we're simply guarding ourselves for a really good reason, for a really, really good reason,
right.
because it hurts.
And that can happen actually. That can happen in a yoga studio, just in your mind when you're looking around at everyone else who looks like they perfectly know all these poses and they, you know,
Mhm.
um, and even and you are literally safe. You are physically safe. You are,
Mhm.
you are emotionally safe. No one is going to attack you. Everyone, they're going to be very patient. But yeah, we can isolate ourselves, huh?
Oh, for
By
sure.
worrying too much about that
There's the
stuff.
key. Are you curious? And that's back to awareness.
Right, right.
Always back to awareness. Am I curious what my body doing, what my breath is doing, what my mind is doing? Do they go together or are they separated? And so even if we take on, you go to those amazing yoga classes and everybody's doing it in quotation marks right, because there is no such thing as doing it right. They're so strongly in their belief that this is right, and they know they've lost the curiosity, and so therefore, and don't, I've done
Oh,
it too, right? And therefore, you're losing the therapeutic benefit. Or as my teacher would say, then you're just exercising. It's okay to do that. Just know that's what
right.
you're doing.
Oh, that's a
Yeah.
really good point. That's actually really helpful because I do think, and maybe it's a Western thing. I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of times we approach it as this, there's this very Western idea of efficiency, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how, and something like yoga can be thought of as, yeah, just simply an exercise class.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for
And
sure. And it's okay to go to it for that.
right,
Just just acknowledge that's what I'm using this for today,
right.
or even in this moment.
So
And
have you
sometimes
ever
that's just
have you
getting
ever
through it.
seen somebody cry
Oh yeah.
during a
Oh
class?
yeah.
And what do you think is
Um,
happening?
Not as often during a class, but almost every single session I've had with private session with a client, there are tears. Doesn't matter what we're working on, because we just hold on to a lot of stuff. We just
Yeah.
do. And I'll say, sometimes it's just like you were little, and the neighbor kid like said, you can't throw that right, and you hold on to it. So who
Mhm.
knows what's in there? And in some ways, I don't really care what's in there. I care about, are you processing it?
Right. Right.
So yeah, there's tears.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And you've mentioned a little bit about, I've done it too. What's been your experience on your yoga journey where you maybe have experienced some of these times of, have you held on to things and then
Of
had to,
course, of course.
okay, what does that feel like and look like
I
for
feel
you?
like,
And then how
how
did
do
you
you, yeah.
how do you open
I,
yourself up to let that out?
I for one would say the only reason yoga was a lifeline is because there was so much. So I gravitated toward yoga because I was an anxious kid. And
Mm,
and then I struggled with depression. I struggled with suicidal depression. I still,
mm,
there's been so much struggle because my nervous system never did feel safe.
right.
When did I recognize that? Oh, probably 2 years ago. So I've practiced this whole time with like, okay, well, I just love this, and it draws me in, and I feel better when I'm done, and I want to learn more about it. And I have thousands of hours of training. It's crazy that just 2 years ago I went, oh, it's because I never actually felt safe. And I never ever felt, and I didn't feel worthy, and I didn't feel whole and complete. And so
Right.
it is a yoga journey. And those moments where I really needed yoga, it was always these moments of doubting my capacity to be okay.
Mm,
And that's really always where pain comes from, right? I am not okay and I won't be okay later. And so if we can get at any moment, if I could get myself into, but right now, are my feet okay? Yes. Are my hands okay? Yes. Is my nose okay? Yes. Are my eyes okay? Yes. Do I hurt? Yes, I do. Am I okay though? Yes. And we're talking decades of practice of just trying to sit in our okayness. But I wonder if we asked anybody, if we took them in off the street, and we asked anybody, would anybody ever feel okay? Is that
mhm.
something we feel a majority of our day? Probably not.
Right. So, do you think there's a spiritual component to the practice of yoga, or can
Oh,
be?
absolutely. Absolutely. There's a spiritual component. I don't think we can recognize any of yoga without a spiritual component. Very much so, it's not a religion in any
Mhm,
way, but it is
mhm,
deeply spiritual. Deeply spiritual because you've heard me say, we believe we are whole and complete. We are believe and this is just like the belief of yoga philosophy in general. We don't need fixing. There isn't a problem. Stuff got stacked on us and we haven't moved through it.
mm,
And so, therefore, our wholeness had to come from something, right? It came from something. And so, whether we say it's from God or it's from the divine or it's from, Mother Nature or it's from, the whole and the oneness, to me, it matters absolutely not the words that you put to it. It's really important that you feel it. I am whole and complete, and I am connected to all that is whole and complete. Because we don't look at a tree and go, something's wrong with you. Yeah, we don't look at a flower and go, something's wrong with you. It's also whole and complete, exactly as it is. So, that deeply spiritual component is about the only way we really can start doing the work of the work. And you've just heard how hard that is. And I
yeah,
can imagine it's been hard for you too.
it is, and it's a really powerful idea to start with wholeness and completeness, especially because you can feel so incomplete.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was such a prevailing experience and feeling after Steve passed away.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Steve and I we were both really separate, strong, healthy, I would say, individuals, but with a really tight bond to each other. And it was interesting how much of myself I felt like I lost
Mm-hmm.
without him. And it's just, and this is it's just a totally different concept that, that I was already whole and complete, and
Yeah.
that I didn't lose a part of myself when he was when he was gone. I'm trying to wrap my mind around that.
It is really, really hard. And in fact,
Yeah.
your mind almost can't take it. Your body does. And
Yeah.
so those then are again the practices of yoga where we go into things like mindfulness and breathing, and we have to teach our body to remember it. And it's kind of fascinating to me. I can say one of the most special experiences is being in a room full of people and talking about when you were a baby, right? When each and every one of us was born, did anybody ever go, not that one? No, we were whole and we were beautiful, and someone picked us up and they loved us just because we were alive,
Right.
and the whole, and yeah, and that feeling in the room, all of us just going, I remember, it's like goosebumpy. And that is actually what I believe yoga is trying to do is remind us in a time when our mind had nothing to do with it. There was nothing in our little baby mind that was trying to, it
Right.
was just like,
Right.
of
Right.
course I deserve to be loved and picked up and taken care of. Of course I do.
Just because I exist.
Just because I exist.
Yeah.
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 And that's that yoga says, deeply spiritually, that is our true nature. And then we get to add in other people that we love and other people that love us. But our true nature is for our body to remember.
Right. 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 And grief, loss, trauma, it puts you in a state of perpetual fight or flight.
Mm-hmm. It does. Yeah.
And so that's where the disconnect and
Mm-hmm.
the unhelpful thoughts kind
Oh,
of
for
creep
sure.
in. Yeah.
I can give my experience with suicidal depression as always feeling that same way. Some part of me is missing.
Mm.
Something isn't right. Something is gone. And so we can almost relate that as the same exact, kind of I'm grieving, except in
Hmm.
depression, you don't even know what you're grieving.
Right.
It's just not supposed to be this way. It's not supposed to
Right.
feel like this. It's not supposed to look like this. Something's wrong.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And so then the treatment of that is remembering your base nature as divine, as grace, as whole and complete.
And so you have found that 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 yoga practice, which really you're describing not as just the movements, but the mindfulness of
Oh,
it,
for sure. Yeah.
that really that really heals that sense of emptiness.
It can. It can. And it has for me. And it
Yeah.
has for me in a way that if I don't practice, my mind very easily starts to go, something's
Okay.
wrong. And so my body has to remember that everything's okay, that I'm okay, that
And
all is okay.
so how long did it take you? Do you feel like you still have to bat away those ideations at times, or have you
Mm.
healed from that particular
Mm. This is,
hardship?
mm. I feel that I get triggered less often. And when I say triggered, I mean things that come up, and we know it in any state of grieving anything or moving through anything. If something reminds us, and we go, "Oh yeah,
Hmm.
I remember,"
Yeah.
and um, and that has less impact, and it happens less often. That also has not just been yoga. That's been 2 years of weekly therapy.
Right.
um,
Right. Right. Yeah.
but I can say that my mental health got significantly better because of the divorce. And so, therefore, I can look at it and say it was painful and it was difficult and there's lots of grief and it was necessary. And I think that
Right.
would be harder for somebody who, lost someone suddenly, is that it wasn't necessary. So for me, I can look at that
Right.
benefit and say my mental health is so much better, so much better.
Right.
Um,
Right.
so if that answers your question, yeah.
Yeah, it actually does. And it it's interesting. I I avoid comparing griefs, and I and I'm not meaning to compare, but the death of the expectations for the relationship, right?
Mm-hmm.
The the loss of what you thought was going to be the companionship that would be sweet and kind and good and, growing. That is like the death that happens before the decision. So maybe in the case of somebody who loses someone physically, the decision kind of happens after the
Mm-hmm.
decision to find meaning
Yeah,
again.
I hear that.
But I definitely think that there's a relatability
Mm-hmm.
to all of the feelings that come with grief, the despair, the unfairness,
Mm-hmm.
anger, all.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I hear
uh,
what you're saying because a lot of that came before the decision. Yeah, you're correct. Yeah.
right, right. So in that aspect, and that's something about compassion, right? Is that you don't have to experience the same grief as someone else to have compassion for their pain,
Mm.
that they're experiencing pain.
Yeah.
And
Right.
I love that you have this skill and training and knowledge that you can take, that you combine with your own sense of compassion for what pain feels like, that you're able to help others working through their pain.
Mm-hmm.
It must be a very satisfying um, field to be in.
I would completely agree. I would completely agree, and I would say it was always divinely meant for me.
Mm,
I can look back at who I was as a child and having some of those feelings and having those struggles and saying I could not possibly help anyone if I
mm,
didn't first go through this. I
yeah.
just wouldn't understand, and I very much understand. Now,
Right.
not always great, but I do.
Right, right. Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like that totally underscores that whole idea that
Mm.
yeah, as we suffer and then work through, we develop new we we see the world in a way that we didn't before. We see you see suffering in places you wouldn't have been able to see before.
I wouldn't have been able to.
Right. And when
Yeah.
you see it, then you can also address it and try to be a light,
Hmm.
at least not to add to others' suffering.
For sure. And I think all of us, even if we're sitting in the pain at the moment, whatever it is, we can at least say, okay, I can make meaning of this, as you've said, and I can add this to my compassion bucket for other people, and I can even look at, for example, my son in middle school, and he's grieving like I had a whole summer, and now all I do is work, and this is really hard, and I can still be like, I understand. I completely and compassionately understand your loss of your summer.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you'll be okay,
And
right?
you'll be
And
okay.
you'll be okay.
And it feels like a huge deal to him, because, that's his experience and that's okay
Right.
too.
Right. Right. Okay. So if someone were to be grieving, um, what do you think is the first step towards finding some peace through yoga?
Mm. Um, So you did mention that so yoga actually has 8 limbs, and that's even questionable. We just kind of choose 8 limbs and say so. On these 8 limbs, asana practice or physical movement is just one of them, and so we would want to reach for some of the other limbs like breathing practices like yamas and niyamas, which are kind of like commitments that we make to ourselves. For example, I'm going to be honest, truthfulness, Satya, I'm going to be honest with myself. Right? I
Okay.
feel this.
Yeah.
Right? So that would be a great start. Or ahimsa is about non-harming. I'm not going to harm myself here. Right?
Yeah.
Or we have santosha, contentment. I'm going to be right here. I'm going to be right here, and I'm just going to be content with this day or this moment. And so if we step back into some of those practices, I very much like just this is okay. Just this is okay. Right? Because if we're like sitting right inside a painful experience, it's hard to brush your hair some days. It's hard
Right.
to look at yourself in the mirror some days. It's hard to get up some days. And so if you're consistently coming back to some of those practices of, I'm just going to be honest with myself, I'm going to practice kindness to myself, I'm going to be right where I am, justice is okay. And then we can move into some breathing practices where you just check in. Am I breathing? Okay, that's good. I'm still breathing.
Yeah.
How am I breathing? Where am I breathing? When am I breathing? And we start to notice a pattern. Okay, so when I don't feel okay, my breathing starts to feel like this, or it goes over here, or it does this. And when I feel okay, it does this over here. And so now I can track my breathing, and that helps me have something to root or to ground to. And you've probably heard that a lot with like grief work, is like there needs to be something that we anchor to.
Yes.
And I actually steer people more towards things that also hold the memory of the grief so that we're not distracting ourselves and saying, I'm going to ground to this thing that has nothing to do with this. Like my mother-in-law is on my fridge. She's,
Oh,
been there over a year and she's something to
yeah.
ground to. And then I talk to her every once in a while about decisions I'm making and things the kids are
Yeah.
doing. And it becomes this anchor point where I can kind of check in. Am I
Yes.
rooted into her presence and honoring her being? And am I also giving myself some places where I can just say, that's okay. And that's okay. Yeah. So I would say those are a great place to start. Because again, you've heard it starts so much more with awareness practices than it does with moving your body. Eventually, you'll want to move your body because you're holding whatever it is in your body. So,
Hmm.
stretching, walking, shaking. My teacher loves it when you're shaking or you're jiggling. All of that we can take back to you are that naked little baby and someone's holding you and they're applying pressure and they're rocking and they're
Hmm.
humming. And so our bodies process things through that. Um, but yeah, I would say, first thing is just start with just this is okay. And I'm noticing what this is. And I'm giving myself compassion to be right here, right here.
I love that. I love that. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm I'm hoping just listening to you describe all of this would give somebody the courage to step into a yoga class because I can hear the compassion and the non-judgment in your voice,
Hmm.
right? And one of the things that I love the most going to class, there's always there's always an emphasis on doing what your body is capable and wants to do today.
Hmm.
And that emphasis has helped me a lot.
Hmm.
Once you walk through the door, that's the hardest part, right?
Oh
Is
gosh.
to get up
Oh yeah.
and go walk through the door, but then it's nice to have it's nice to block out what someone may or may not be awesome at doing and be able to just be in my body at that moment. It really is it's so simple and yet it's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Um and that invitation to go to a yoga class because in that space you're getting constant prompts or constant reminders. Practice with the body you brought today.
Hmm.
Practice with yourself today. And then that's why we're always a student, is because you're always a student of who am I today?
Hmm.
What's going on in here today? What wants to come up and come out of me today? You know,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So very simple, but sometimes the simplest things can be the trickiest to allow ourselves to get into because we get our to-do lists and we get
Right.
our when am I going to move on lists, and
Right.
no, you'll move
Right.
forward. You'll move forward.
Right.
You won't move
Right.
on. You even reminded me just talking about that of, I've been pregnant 3 times, obviously. And every single pregnancy, it was like, oh, well, do I really want to practice in this body right now? Not
Yeah.
really. And this body can't even do that. Oh, and so we're always having this, this shifting, even grieving process of our own bodies. Own
Right.
bodies.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah. And that's just going to be constant, right? Because
constant.
everything's always
We're
changing.
always going to be aging. I can bring up that I think yoga can also offer a refuge in the way that yoga very, very much so in its philosophy base says, and we will die.
Yeah.
Get comfy with it.
Yeah.
You are aging and you will also die. And it's not like, and hey, just, hit you in the face with that, but that's savasana. Savasana is a corpse pose. It says, for a moment, I will lay here and I will be okay with my and others' mortality.
Mm.
This body is my home for now, and I have to be here now and I have to live in it now. But I also respect that now is always changing.
And I'm
And it's one of the
okay.
few practices I think that really does that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really that's interesting. It is important. It's important. We don't like our mortality. We certainly don't like others' mortality.
There it is. Yep. We don't like things to change.
Right. Or to
So if we
end.
can practice being a little more comfortable with, I don't like my body today, that's okay. I'm practicing and that's
Yeah.
okay. Right?
Yeah.
I don't like that this changed and that's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay to
Yeah.
not like it
Yeah.
and to continue to move
Yeah.
forward, continue to
Yeah.
practice. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks for bringing that up. I appreciate that. So this has been a great discussion. I'm feeling very zen and feeling like I want to get my mat out and and just I want to do maybe I want to do corpse pose and just
Oh no, I
rest
was
and
gonna
be
say just lay
quiet.
there.
Yeah. but uh but thank you for taking the time to talk to
Absolutely.
me. I really appreciate it. And
Yeah.
I really hope that more people will take advantage of things like yoga as really a tool to help process grief. I think it's a great tool in the toolbox. Like you had
It
mentioned
really is.
before, therapy is really helpful. I talked to somebody recently about mindfulness. These things are all tools.
They're all tools. And the most important thing is to find the tools that work for you.
Hmm.
Yeah, so you can access them, and then practice them when you're feeling good so that you have access to them when you're not feeling so good.
Yes.
That's really important. So that's the biggest thing I encourage is, go seek out. And if you don't love this yoga class, go try a different one. If you don't like
Yes.
this teacher, go try a different one because we're all so different. Um,
That's
and
good.
then
Yes.
yeah, and then if there's more curiosity about yoga therapy, you can, look that up online. And there's even, just like a little search on, yoga for grief, and you can find one of my teachers, Antonio Sayus, is on there, and he's an expert in that. And I saw some stuff on YouTube. I saw some stuff on Yoga International. So there's definitely things out there of people who want to help and want to give you tools.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for the reference. Tell me
Yeah,
the name of the Antonio. What's his last name?
Sayus,
How do
S
you spell
A
that?
Sayus. I might be wrong about
Sayus.
that. Hmm. Yeah.
Well, before we wrap up, can I ask you the question I ask everyone, my final
Hmm.
question?
Of
And
course.
by the way, thank you again for
And
being
so,
here. What do you think it means to grieve well?
oh, to grieve well. To recognize that you're grieving, to be present with it, and to honor that it's okay to not be okay.
Thank you. I
Welcome.
appreciate that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.